Welcome to Staff Works Explained. If you are here for the first time, please consider subscribing to this channel. You can also hit the notification bell so that whenever you upload a new video, you are notified. In this video, we'll be looking at the Kenya decision. So instead of building a pipeline, there is now some thoughts to build a railway to Turkana, the oil fields. Kenya's long delayed ambitions to become an oil exporting nation has reached another moment of strategic reassessment. For more than a decade, the country's petroleum development plans centered on a dedicated crude pipeline from the oil fields of Turkana to the Indian Ocean for export. That pipeline was expected to unlock commercial production, link Kenya to regional energy markets, as well as anchor the broader Lamu Port, South Sudan, Ethiopia Transport Corridor. Today, however, a different idea is quietly gaining policy attention, extending the railway network to South Lokichar and transporting crude oil by rail rather than pipeline. The proposal represents more than a technical adjustment. It reflects deeper economic realities surrounding Kenya's oil reserves, the collapse of earlier regional cooperation, financing constraints, as well as strategic need to build infrastructure that serves multiple purposes. Here we examine the origins of the pipeline plan, where it is stalled or why it is stalled, regional geopolitics that shaped it, and whether railway could realistically replace the pipeline as the backbone of the Kenya petroleum export strategy. Let's start by looking at the original plan, the Lokichar Lamu Crude Oil Pipeline. The initial infrastructure solution for Kenya oil discovery was the Lokichar Lamu Crude Oil Pipeline, a project designed to move crude from South Lokichar Basin in Turkana County to the port of Lamu on the Indian Ocean, Lokichar Lamu Crude Oil Pipeline. The pipeline was planned as part of the wider Lapset Corridor initiative, one of the largest infrastructure projects in East Africa. Key design features included length of roughly 800 kilometers from Turkana to the coast. Route it was passing through Turkana, Samburu, Isiolo, Meru, Garissa, and Lamu counties before terminating at the new Lamu Port. Its capacity was initially about 65,000 barrels per day, expanding to roughly 80 barrels per day. And then the projected production, Kenya expected export to eventually reach about 120 barrels per day once the field matured. Cost estimates varied. There were mentions of 120 billion or 1 to 1.5 billion. Because Turkana crude oil was waxy and solidifies easily, the pipeline would have required heating systems along its length, increasing both construction and operating cost. Let's now look at the regional strategy, a joint pipeline with Uganda, and why it also collapsed. Kenya's initial vision for the pipeline was not purely domestic. It was conceived as a regional export corridor linking multiple oil producers. In early 2010s, Kenya-Uganda agreed in principle to build a shared export pipeline running from Uganda oil fields in Hoima through Turkana to Lamu, and this was called Uganda Crude Oil Pipeline. The proposed line would have stretched roughly 1,500 kilometers, combining oil from both countries and delivering it to the Indian Ocean. The proposed line would have stretched roughly 1,500 kilometers, combining oil from both countries and delivering it to the Indian Ocean. For Kenya, the arrangement made strong economic sense. We had high volumes. Uganda oil reserves are far larger than Kenya's. Shared cost, where infrastructure expenses would have spread across two producers. And then there was regional integration, where the corridor would have anchored Lapset as the East African energy export hub. At that time, Uganda was estimated to hold over 6.5 billion barrels of oil, compared with Kenya's smaller resource base. Without Uganda's volume, Kenya pipeline economics would have been tighter. Now, why did Uganda abandon the Kenyan route? The joint project collapsed in 2016 when Uganda chose a different export route through Tanzania. So instead of Lamu, Kampala opted for the East African Crude Oil Pipeline (EACOP), linking its oil fields to the Tanzania port of Tanga. EACOP is now under construction as 1,443 kilometers heated pipeline line, expected to be the longest of this type in the world. Uganda's decision was shaped by several factors. One, there was security concern where Kenya route would have passed through parts of northern Kenya affected by insurgent activities and banditry. Tanzania route was seen as less exposed to security risks. Then there is terrain and engineering complexity, where Tanzania corridor offered relatively easy and land acquisition engineering conditions compared with the arid and remote northern Kenya route. Then there is political alignment, where Uganda's partners in the oil project, including international oil majors Total Energies, favored the Tanzania route. Once Uganda exited the plan, Kenya lost the volume base that justified a large export pipeline. For that point onward, the Lokichar Lamu pipeline had to rely solely on Kenya reserves. What are the structural challenges facing the pipeline? Even after redesigning the project as purely Kenyan pipeline, several obstacles still persisted. Financial difficulties. Oil infrastructure of this scale requires large upfront investment before revenue begins flowing. Kenya reserves estimated in the hundreds of millions of barrels rather than billions make lenders cautious. Then we have investor exits. The regional development consortiums included international companies such as Tullow Oil, African Corp Oil, and Total Energies. Over time, shifting global oil markets and project delays reduced investor appetite. Then we had land and regulatory issues, where pipeline projects require extensive land acquisition and environmental approvals. In Kenya's case, even routing adjustments were required after the military raised concerns about line crossing defense land in Garissa. Then we have infrastructure dependency, where the pipeline was designed to work in tandem with new port facilities in Lamu. Delays in other lapset components indirectly slowed the oil project as well. Then comes the railway proposal, which is a strategic reconsideration. Against this background, policymakers and planners have begun exploring an alternative, extending the railway to Turkana and transporting crude by train. The proposal would involve extending the existing railway network northwards towards South Lokichar, linking the oil fields to the national logistics systems and ultimately to the coast. Unlike a dedicated pipeline, the railway line would not exist solely for oil purpose. It could move crude oil in tanks, wagons, construction materials, livestock and agricultural products, passengers, general freight to northern Kenya. From a project management perspective, this transforms the investment from a single-purpose asset into a multi-use economic corridor. That distinction is very critical in regions where oil volumes alone cannot justify the infrastructure cost. Could rail solve the logistic problem? The railway approach has several advantages. Diversified economic returns, where a pipeline generates revenue only when oil flows through it. A railway supports multiple industries simultaneously. Then there is lower initial risk. Rail infrastructure can be built incrementally and expanded as demand grows. Pipelines, by contrast, require full construction before operations begin. Then there is regional development, where northern Kenya remains among the least connected parts of the country. A railway could stimulate trade, tourism, and mineral development beyond oil. However, rail also introduces a technical and economic challenge. Transporting crude by rail is typically more expensive per barrel than pipelines. Once production reaches scale, rail operations require loading terminals, tanker fleets, scheduling systems, and continuous logistics management. Pipelines remain the global standard for long-distance oil transport precisely because they offer lower operation cost and continuous flow. What of a possible regional option where Kenya re-engages Uganda? Is that possible? Another strategic question is whether Kenya could or should revisit regional cooperation. If Kenya and Uganda were to reconnect the infrastructure planning, either through pipelines or integrated logistic corridor, the economics of both projects could change significantly. However, the political and contractual commitments behind EACOP make such shift unlikely in the near term. Uganda has already locked in financing partners and construction contracts, for its Tanzania route. That does not eliminate future collaborations entirely. East African petroleum infrastructure could still evolve into a network where pipelines, railways, and product pipelines complement each other. And now, the larger strategic question. Ultimately, the debate between pipeline and railway reflects a deeper issue: scale. Kenya's oil reserves are commercially viable but not vast. The reality forces policymakers to reconsider whether a billion-dollar dedicated pipeline is justified. Infrastructure decisions must align with production volumes, financial capacity, and also long-term strategic in terms of region. In some cases, the most rational solution is not the most technically efficient one, but the one that spreads economic benefits across all sectors. In conclusion, we can say that Kenya consideration for a railway extension to Turkana marks a shift in how the country is thinking about energy infrastructure. For years, the Lokichar-Lamu pipeline symbolized the path towards oil exports and regional energy influence. Yet the collapse of the Uganda partnership, investor hesitation, as well as uncertain production volumes have forced a reassessment of that model. A railway offers flexibility, broader economic utility, and potential lower financial risk. At the same time, it may not fully replicate the efficiency of a dedicated pipeline once oil production reaches scale. The decision Kenya ultimately takes will reveal much about its long-term energy strategy, whether the country is preparing for a large petroleum economy or adapting its infrastructure to a more diversified development path, where oil is only one component of the northern Kenya transformation. So thank you for reaching this far. If it's your first time here, please consider subscribing to this channel. You can also hit the notification bell so that whenever we upload a new video, you're notified. Please leave your comment about this shift and let us meet in the next one. Thank you.